audience, which relates to this. So you've just talked about regulators sharing information, but then also talked about how industry does that. And Cormac, you also kind of reflected on that a little bit earlier on. So the question is, how can we share our mistakes openly in the industry, like it is sometimes happening in the aviation or banking industry, where investigations are done jointly? So not to anyone in particular, if anyone's got any thoughts on that particular comment from the floor, perhaps we could take those there now if anyone has any thoughts.
Yeah, I'm happy to start off on that one. Again, it comes back to the culture within the company, right? To enable that conversation to have. And I'll probably weave in another question regarding the paperless versus a digital system. So we found from our experience, moving to an electronic system is a way of eliminating human error, right? If you can structure either your QC lab notebooks or your manufacturing notebooks as well, such that there's gates at various points so you cannot proceed. So it is a great tool for eliminating human error, but it does bring in digital error. That data needs to be managed, it needs to be backed up, it needs to be controlled in a way that it doesn't bring about any risk. And we had a situation I was talking to David recently about, which involved cloud-based solutions. And it was one that we were new in this space. Our risk assessment turned out to be weak to begin with, and we lost a huge amount of data. And straight away, I'm left with a massive compliance gap because I'm missing a huge amount of batch data for product on the marketplace. And we all looked at each other virtually on the phone and said, let's call the regulator. Let's call them straight away with an action plan. Let's not wait 6 weeks and do our investigation and then say, here it is. Or let's wait 2 years for the next inspection and hope they don't find it. Absolutely not. So we put together a protocol and had a virtual phone call like this to say, here's the problem. There's product in the marketplace. We believe it is perfectly fine, but we are missing core data. But we will piece together all of the bits of metadata. And suddenly, Carmelo, I'm thinking of you, and I'm thinking of, here we are, it's data integrity all over again that we started talking about 5 years ago. And so when you talk about 30 years of GMPs, everything just keeps cycling through again and again and again. And so we had a data integrity issue that we could not solve without the collaboration of the regulator. And nobody in the company had any objection to that. And it's worked out extremely well. So I think, speed and openness and honesty to engage with the regulator, because you both want to do exactly the same thing for the patient safety.
That's really helpful, Cormac. And actually, perhaps just to kind of link that to another question that you've had from the audience, or at least part of that question. Do people on the panel see a paperless system as a way to mitigate risk or introduce new risk? I mean, Cormac, you just talked about the digital risk. Any other thoughts from anybody else on that particular question?
I think, as the question is asked, is it introducing new issues or is it eliminating? I think it's doing both. So it's eliminating and making the operation much more efficient. And then the flip side of that is, if there is an error, then how do you find the error? I'll use the lab as a classic example. So in the lab, there are some invalid OSs. I'm going to the minute details. Is if there are invalid OSs, and then you go back and you piece the pieces together, you do a hypothesis and you say, okay, it was the pipette, it was this, it was that. But then the same thing when you go to digital, and you can't really go back and say this was an error or that was an error, because the workflow in order to do it in a digital manner is such that human errors, I hate to say it like this, but we have to look at human errors with a different lens. So it introduces new risk for those of us who are going 100% digital. And the whole validation piece and backtracking. So on one hand, it's much easier, but on the other hand, it's things that we're probably not prepared for.
Yeah, certainly